4, so I don't know if we want to give another minute or go ahead and get started.
Let's give it 1 minute and then start at 4:35.
Okay.
I'll text Dr. Fletcher and see if she's going to be able to join.
Okay, thank you, Amy.
Hannah, because I am on my phone in the car, and I do love enjoying looking at everybody's smiling faces, but thank you. If you could put some of that stuff on the screen, I'm going to have to be able to look at it to keep myself on track, if that's okay.
Absolutely. I'll keep sharing my screen, and I'll make any changes that need to be made as we go along. I think we changed the agenda as recently as yesterday afternoon, so I'd sent one out, but there may be some changes between the one I sent and the one that's posted and on board. So for everyone's benefit, if you want to look at the one that's on board, and that'll be the one we're working from.
Great. All right, are we at 4:35?
Yes, we are.
Wendy is trying to log on.
Oh, okay, great. If we want to go ahead, Pam, if you wouldn't mind to maybe go ahead and proceed with the roll call, we can get started.
All right. If you will have your cameras on, Chair Damaris.
Here.
Vice Chair James Lee Stevens.
Here.
Secretary Wendy Fletcher is attempting to log on. Joe Herdink.
Here.
Regent Schaus.
Present.
And Regent Witten.
Present.
All right. We have all members except Dr. Fletcher, so we do have a quorum.
Okay. The first order of business is to execute approval of the minutes from the I'm sorry. I'm going to wait for Hannah to get caught up so I'm looking at the right thing. Yeah, so if you could scroll down just a little bit more, Hannah. There are the minutes from the last meeting of this committee, the System Policy and Planning Committee. Of course, we did not have the staff and faculty representatives at that meeting, and so appreciate you guys reading those minutes so you could get caught up on the discussion. But I would like to ask if there are any changes, additions, deletions to the minutes from the last meeting. Okay, I've not heard anybody recommend any changes, additions, or deletions. So I'd like to call for approval of the meeting minutes from the previous meeting of the System Policy and Planning Committee.
So moved.
Second.
All right. Are there any objections? Seeing none and hearing none, we can approve these minutes by consensus. They are hereby approved.
Thank you, Pam. Okay, the next item on the agenda for this meeting is the new business item, which is the discussion of the board agenda for the next full meeting of the board regents, which will be on Friday, December 3rd. And you should have, and I believe Hannah asked everyone to look at the version in your onboard, the proposed draft agenda. First couple of sections are standard call to order, press notification, roll call, and then a call for approval of minutes. I'd like to point out one item that was changed from the last time, and that's under the consent agenda. We are going to be pulling the personnel actions out of the consent agenda. Just a discussion that Hannah and I had about how that used to be more reviewed in more detail at the previous finance committee meeting that used to exist under our former board structure. And we kind of felt like it was important to bring that back to the full board and to not have it in the consent agenda. So what we've done is, instead of having 3 items under the consent agenda, we've placed the personnel actions under the board agenda items with a action in front of it so that the full board has the opportunity to review the information and take action upon it via vote. So that is the change that was made to the consent agenda section. Under board agenda items, you're going to see that a few items have been highlighted in yellow. The first one being the personnel actions I just mentioned, and then item D, and then scrolling on down a little bit more, a few other items. Just to respect everybody's time, we try to schedule this meeting to last for about an hour to an hour and a half, no longer than that. I'm going to ask that for this particular meeting, if the committee is open to this, that we focus our discussion today on the items in yellow, because they were items that we did not get to at all at the last meeting. However, I do want to respect the fact that we have 2 new members of the committee. And so, sort of first ask them if we have any questions about the items that are not in yellow that we can answer, although hopefully most of that was answered in the minutes. And then if not, we'll proceed to the discussion of the highlighted items. Before I go into that, Pam, did you have your hand raised?
I did. I just wanted to note for the record that Dr. Fletcher has arrived and is in the meeting.
Wonderful. Welcome, Wendy.
Sorry, I just finished with clinic.
Great, thank you. So far, all we've done is approve the meeting minutes from the last meeting. And I don't know if you joined when I was talking about pulling personnel actions out of consent. Did you hear that part? So what we had done in the last full board meeting was personnel actions was part of the consent agenda for the full board. And we're actually thinking that it might be best to pull that out, since previously the finance committee used to have an opportunity to look at that in more detail. And then make a recommendation to the full board. So we do want to have personnel actions outlined for the full board to look at and to take action upon. So that's been pulled out of the consent agenda section and into the board agenda items, and it's listed as item C. Okay, are there any questions from any of the regents on the non-highlighted items that we need to address before we dive into more detailed discussion on the highlighted items? And someone has their hand up. I don't know who it is.
That's me, Joe Herdink. There was talk in the minutes I was reading through a couple days ago about some sort of bonus or something for the employees. What action, where is that at in the board agenda, if that's even on there? Is that under personnel actions, or is employee benefits, or is that something different?
I think it's being highlighted right now by Hannah. So there was a request for the staff to take a look at what it would take during our discussion at this committee meeting. James Lee may have asked for more detail on have Vice President Falwell that will give us numbers in 3 different categories: a $500 stipend, a $750 stipend, and a $1,000 stipend. So we'll hear that information and then discuss as a board, and if the board will then, take action if it so desires against one of those 3 scenarios.
Okay. Am I allowed to make a recommendation or ask for something more on that report Wendell's going to give here at this meeting?
Sure.
Okay. Can we also include just in the numbers, as we know, part-time staff in those figures just to look at? I know in all the other last bonuses have been given, part-time staff were not included and are not represented on this board. And I was just interested in seeing if that would break the bank or what that would be. Because I know in the past, 4 or 5 years, a lot of full-time positions have been turned into part-time positions because of cutbacks at the local levels. So I would just be interested in seeing something like that, if that's possible.
We can certainly request that Wendell put that number together. I think
Okay.
That the cost to the part-time staff, and I don't know how stable that number is of part-time staff or how volatile that number is, but we could certainly have him capture it for each of those 3 categories, I would think. So Hannah, would you bring that back to Vice President Falwell?
Absolutely. And just for clarification, are we talking about just part-time staff or also part-time staff and faculty, which would probably include adjuncts? Is that?
I'm personally just looking at the staff from
Okay.
the staff perspective. I
Okay.
don't know if someone wants to look at the adjunct part of it. I'm kind of out of that area, so I try not to dive into that as much as I cannot.
Sure. Okay. I will take that back to Wendell.
Thank you.
Good question, Joe. I think I see a hand up from Alexandria.
Yes, ma'am. I noticed on there item J, information mandatory vaccine plan, OSHA emergency temporary standard. What is that? Are we getting ready to make it mandatory for our students and staff to be vaccinated?
No, that is actually.
This is Paul.
Yeah. I'll let Paul answer that.
The answer is no. There's been actually Pam could talk to this better than me, but if they mandated it at the federal level, we wouldn't have had a choice. But Pam, can you explain what OSHA just did?
Right. So as part of President Biden's executive order requiring healthcare workers to be vaccinated, et cetera, he also directed OSHA to implement an emergency temporary standard, which ultimately was intended to take public comment and then become a permanent standard. And the emergency standard would require that any employers, including public sector employers, who have more than 100 employees, and those 100 employees could be anywhere. So you could be spread out all over the state or in one place. Any employer would have to have a mandatory vaccine plan policy in place by the 5th of December. And then it would begin by the 4th of January. All that said, and there would be exemptions, religious exemption, medical exemption, and then something that's called a medical deferral. So we have moved forward in writing our policy, but also knowing that this is facing multiple court challenges, one of which has created a fairly permanent stay until further developments. And that came out of the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. And essentially they enjoined OSHA from implementing or taking any steps to implement this requirement. So we're on hold, but we're getting everything in place just in case. And it would not, Alexandria, apply to students. It would only apply to employees.
Thank you.
Great. Are there any other questions for the non-yellow highlighted items? Yes, I see a hand up. Brianna?
Yes, Chair Damaris, thank you. I noticed in the minutes, the previous minutes that we've just recently approved, there was talk about the OPEB trust. It appears that you had actually requested from Pam Duncan that we be provided more information at the December 3rd meeting as a full board about that. It appears that that's not been really defined for the board at this point. And I noticed that it is, or it does appear as an action item, or at least the OPEB is mentioned under action item. It's the E agenda item. Will we be getting further information about what that actually consists of and like a more comprehensive definition, especially for new members who might not be familiar?
Yes. So, well, yes and both. So we will be getting more detailed information about the OPEB trust. The board has been presented with information about this trust in the past, so I don't want to mislead anybody to thinking that we don't know anything about it. It's just there are certain details regarding the structure of the trust that I think some board members were not aware of or just didn't have detailed information on. So we'll be getting more detailed information on that, which will be really helpful to us as part of our overall discussion that is going to happen relative to compensation and benefits. So we will be hearing a lot more. Brianna, you'll probably get a lot more information than maybe others have had, because we have had some information in the past, but it'll be a bit more comprehensive this time, and so everybody will learn something, I think, from that discussion. The action item is relative to a change in benefits in that plan. That was an update during our September meeting, and it was good. It was a good update, but what happened was subsequent to that, I had some conversations with General Counsel Duncan, and because of our fiduciary responsibilities relative to approving as a board compensation, which includes benefits, we actually need to take action upon the recommended changes that were presented in September. And we didn't take action. It was more of an update rather than an action item. So it's being brought back to the board to discuss the specific action relative to the proposed changes of the benefit structure of that trust. Pam, did I explain that right?
That's correct. And we will, what we're trying to do is, this is a pretty complex financial matter that we're also trying to boil down into an FAQ so that just anyone could understand it, even if, I'm an old English teacher, so I prefer words to numbers. So we're trying to boil it down for those people who are not friends of numbers, to make sure that they understand at least the overarching principles of the trust and how it came to be, etc. Additionally, we will have some discussion from our outside counsel who helped set up the trust and who also work with other university boards. So they will be there to address any questions relative to statutory duties, etc.
Right. Thank you, Pam. I appreciate that. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you both.
Thank you. Okay. Are we ready to move on to item D, update relative to employee benefits, just to kind of let folks know what that is? Looks like we are. And so Hannah, would you help me with a description of the information that's being pulled together? There was discussion at our last meeting to get more information about employee benefits as it relates to total compensation. I would imagine that Vice President Followall and also HR Director Jackie Cecil are working on this. Could you give us a little overview of what we might see in that update item?
Absolutely. So the conversation at the last policy and planning meeting was that the board would like to see the full picture of compensation, not just salary, but also benefits like retirement, life insurance, vacation days, the entire picture. So we are working on, Wendell and Jackie are working on putting that together now. With all of our employees, that of course you have the faculty and then you have staff, but you also have employees whose benefits vary because they are in different personnel systems such as KERS, KTRS, 403B. So they are pulling all that information together. I think we had it labeled under our last agenda that we looked at as HR procedures, but we changed that to better reflect what will be presented, which are the employee benefits. So that will be that update item. And I think it was the board's general idea that they would like to see that full benefit package for employees before they go on and vote on the non-recurring employee appreciation item and before they get an update on the compensation and classification plan. So you'll see that it's occurring before those other items.
Great, thank you, Hannah. And Paul, Paul, you still with us?
Yes.
Can you comment about, relative to our tours we've been doing, why this update item is important to us, important especially now to discuss?
Yeah, I've got first off, let me take my hand down. The discussion that's come up at the college tours have been, now through no fault of our own, the tuition waiver was taken away by the legislature. That's been one benefit. But there's other benefits and some suggestions that have come through the HR peer team that I know the board is interested in taking a look at. I do want to say that Wendell and Jackie are really close to having all this information done. They put it in a really easy to understand format, which I appreciate. And I would expect that before we break for Thanksgiving, you'll have that information out there. But yeah, I mean, as we've talked to different constituents on the college tour, we've heard that, what benefits are important to the baby boomers might not be important to my generation and might not be important to the new folks coming in. And so, it's trying to come up with some sort of, benefit cocktail that we can A, afford, but B, make attractive and help retain as many employees as we can. Is that pretty much what you were looking for, Chair Damaris?
Yes. So I think it's
Chair Damaris, I think we lost you.
I think she's probably going through the cell dead zone that I just went through a little while ago.
To me that sorry guys. Okay, can you hear me?
We can hear you now. Yeah, we lost you for a minute.
About all of this. It's been a consistent topic on every single tour that Paul and I have been on, and it's also a desire for the board to understand it better in terms of total comp. So I think this is coming at the absolute right time, and I really appreciate all the work that Wendell and Jackie are doing. As Paul mentioned, everybody on the board, will see this information well before the meeting and have time to digest it. So really appreciate the timeliness of pulling it together.
Yeah, I think, there's some things that.
The next highlighted item, if we can go to that. Go ahead. No, go ahead, Paul.
Regent Stevens has his hand up.
Yes, ma'am, Paul, and thank you for that. I think the board would know what benefits you mentioned them, but have been taken away, and when that was taken away, such as the dental, the vision, and things like that's what I'm saying, especially the things that the board controls. We don't have anything we can't control what the legislature does, but we can control what the benefits we used to have that for various financial reasons have been taken away, and when those were taken away, if that's possible.
Yeah, we can get that. I mean, to my knowledge, vision and dental is still offered. It's not paid for by KCTCS. Now, health insurance, 25% of that premium is covered by the system. So without that augmentation, Vice President Followell and has absorbed these increases, and it's at 25% now. We will have to get a list of any other types of benefits that have dried up since then. Tuition reimbursement has been the big one. And I know that we're looking at different ways to figure out how we could implement that, even if it was a little bit smaller scale. But we'll get that information to you.
Yeah, and I think it's very important what you said, that I think a lot of us did not know how much that we contributed to the health insurance, and the employees contributed, and what benefits we provided. So I certainly appreciate that, and thank you, sir.
No problem. Thanks.
Thank you, James Lee. And thank you, Pam and Hannah, for keeping me on task here, because I can only see so many pictures. So I don't always know if somebody's hand's up. So if you'll help me with that, I appreciate it.
Sure.
All right. The next item, item M, is the program approval process. And I think that this is the one that we kind of brought to Chancellor Williams to ask questions about what the limitations were today, and if those limitations could be challenged or overcome relative to programs having to, each individual college having to get their programs approved, even if it's essentially the same program at each of the different colleges. So I believe we're going to have some discussion on that. Hannah, you'd have to remind me what the action is for that.
Sure. So this is actually some good news that we're going to bring forward. I won't get into too much detail because it is within the chancellor's purview, and she's far more knowledgeable than I am. But she has worked with CPE, and according to them, we are allowed to move forward with a single program approval process that has been asked for by this board. So beginning in December, we will ask for the board to actually take action on this. We're not going to do the information item and then the action item in March, because we know that the board wants this to happen. So we will ask for special permission to go ahead and vote on it in December, so that when we have our meeting in March, we won't have, I think we'd already had listed something like 18 program approvals. Instead, we will have a simplified process where if a program is already offered and has been approved by the college, or been approved by the board, we can offer that program at other colleges. So the only new programs that would be coming forward for approval would be those that have not been offered anywhere before.
That is wonderful, wonderful news. So I look forward to us discussing that action, that update and action as a board in December.
And I would like to note, and for those people who are new to the board, I think you had an orientation about the virtual workspace. If you don't know about that, please reach out to me or Terry Diatley. We can get you going on that, but you have been added to it. When something is uploaded, you receive a notification of that. But Terry Diatley, who's on here, told me via text just now that she has uploaded the policy that would give the single program review. So that is on the virtual workspace. And to jump ahead just a little bit, there is also another one on the virtual workspace that we completed and Terry uploaded just recently on the presidential credentials. And Terry, if you want to add any comments, please do so now. I think she's remaining silent, so I guess we're ready to go.
Great. And then also we should note the virtual workspace is in Teams. So
Correct.
for the new Regents, you'll have to log into your Teams account to gain access to the virtual workspace.
And just a point, if you're looking at the agenda, you will see there are 2 program approvals for Madisonville on the December agenda. So that would be the end of an era, I guess, of the colleges bringing them individually. But we would go ahead and hear those program proposals. And if the board chooses to do so, approve those. And then noting from there on out, we would be doing this under the new policy.
Fantastic. Efficiency at its best.
Aren't we that asked?
I'm going to ask if you could put the agenda back up. Thank you. And so then the next item is an information item regarding accreditation. So I think also Chancellor Williams will be providing an update to us. And this stems out of questions that were asked at the September meeting regarding the individual accreditation at each of our different colleges versus a single accreditation as a system. I know that Chancellor Williams has been doing a lot of analysis and investigative work on that, and I believe this item would be an update on all of her work in that area. Is that correct, Hannah?
Yes, that is correct. Chancellor Williams has been working very hard on looking into this from all the different avenues, I guess, that require study. And I believe it was mentioned on our last call, there's CPE and of course SAC-COC and what they would require, and then also the state legislature. So she's looking into all of those items. She will have information for you on it. It won't require any action. It's just information for the board to determine if they want to look at this more thoroughly or if they do not, based on what she presents. So yeah, that's it for that item.
Great, thank you. The next item is also an information item, and it's review of procedures for evaluation of the president of the KCTCS. And the other one is right behind it for information is review of procedures for faculty and staff elections. So, you know, I think both of these are coming out of the work that this committee is charged with doing, which is taking a look at policies, whether they be old policies that need to be updated or even, you know, policies that may have been tweaked somewhat recently and need to be covered and reminded to the board. But I'm going to ask Hannah and Pam to speak to the details of these 2 items so that we can all be
So I think we're losing Regent Damaris again.
I'm here.
Okay. So I will speak to board policy, which, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it's 1.5. And it is about the organization of the institution, really. So it begins with the governing board, and then it goes down to the KCTCS president and the college presidents and the delegation of authority. And that's the one that I said that Terry uploaded earlier. So there's board policy 1.5, and then there will also be Dr. Williams' policy on program approval. But basically, it revises the old policy and sets forth more standards or more criteria for qualifications for the presidency. What we are doing is basically in looking at the policies, we saw that the chief academic officer, who's actually the second in command, so to speak, at each college, had stricter qualification requirements in policy than the president's did. There was really nothing that spoke to what the president's credentials should be. So we have updated that to the board will require a doctoral degree from an accredited institution. It will also require that there be a sufficient span of experience in running a higher education institution with students of varying levels of attainment and educational need for remediation, etc. It also rewrites the delegation of authority to the KCTCS president to ensure that it's clear that there are administrative duties that the president will carry out, and there are statutory duties that the board needs to approve or ratify, so that is very clear. So it really is governing board. What is your requirement to do? What criteria are you going to set for the KCTCS president? What criteria are you setting for the college presidents? Also, it requires a mechanism for deviation from that. And we are going to, what would happen is if there is deviation from any of those qualifications, the justification would need to come before the board, and that would have to be approved. Questions on that? And Hannah, I'd like to add something on the agenda that we haven't, that we're still working on.
Okay.
It is executive level compensation. I am currently working on a board policy for that, and that will come through to the portal probably sometime tomorrow or very early Monday morning. So it would be really compensation for non-banded employees. If you recall, there was a discussion at the Board of Regents retreat about your non-delegable duty to set compensation and benefits. And unfortunately, there's a whole strata of individuals, I include myself in that, as who are non-banded individuals. And therefore that the board doesn't really take action on their compensation. So what we're trying to do is to set a policy that would give a range. And once again, what different supplemental compensation might be allowed, what benefits, and then if there's a deviation, again, it would have to come for approval to the board. So we would need to add that because we're trying to get that policy added in by the beginning of the year as well. So I don't think it has a number right now, so I couldn't really say what number it is. And I'm not sure where you would want to put it on the agenda.
Okay. So it looks like, just so we're all on the same page, it looks like that board policy that you're talking about, that would involve the credentialing of college presidents, and would be board policy 1.5. That would be, it's I on the agenda, and then we may need to add another one that would be an action item that would regard the salary, I'm sorry, did you say salaries or compensation of?
Compensation of unbanded employees, or
Okay.
non-banded, I think is how they what they call it. And those are generally executive level employees. So the KCTCS president, the board sets his compensation or her compensation, and then all of the other salary schedule is set, but there's a segment of employees, the presidents and the cabinet, who are non-banded. And so essentially there's kind of like a donut hole of compensation that you've never looked at.
Okay.
I think we have a couple of hands up. I first saw Wendy. Do you still have a question?
Yeah, my question had to do with the president policy, the president qualifications. So give me an example of what a deviation might be.
Well, a deviation, I'm not sure. Let me see. I'm trying to think what we had as the qualifications. And Terry, you might help me out because you might have it right in front of you. But we said a doctoral degree from an accredited institution. Say that it was not a doctoral degree, but it was potentially, or even it was a doctoral degree from another country and you needed to make sure there were equivalencies. Or that it was not an accredited institution. Maybe it was a well-respected institution, but it had not been accredited. So that would be a deviation. So any of those things, also if you felt like it was someone who was coming from business but had never been in education, that would be a deviation.
And
Okay.
Pam, that would be something that has to get put before the board ahead of time, right?
Correct, because you would not want to have a presidential candidate going all the way through being selected and then the board not approve that particular deviation. So you would have to put it in ahead of time if, say that there were some sort of justification, and there needs to be a clear and convincing justification for why that needs to deviate from those credentials. So for instance, clear and convincing is a standard of proof. Preponderance is here, clear and convincing is here, and beyond a reasonable doubt is up here. So you have a higher standard of proof even than 50-50. You would have to say, hey, there are all these different reasons that justify why this person would need to be a candidate, and therefore you would then vote on whether they could be a candidate or according to your procedure, because there's going to be a procedure that we need to write with this as well. But right now, the overarching policy will control. If the mechanism for deviation said something like, well, it needs to be the search committee that justifies it, or the president and the search committee, or whatever, then you would want to hear proof of that. So you might even put in some sort of mechanism as to how you perceive that. But Otherwise, the minimum qualifications that we've set out would require a doctoral degree, experience in education, and experience in student success.
Thank you, Pam. I do see several hands that are up right now. Before I call on those people, could you please, Pam, for benefit of everybody, explain the distinction between a policy and a procedure, because there is a distinction.
Right. So I'm going to do it in kind of biological terms. Your policy is your skeleton. So it sets kind of the foundation for the body of what you're doing. And then the meat of it and how you implement that policy, how you make that skeleton move, is the procedure. So the procedure will be the process, and the policy is the overarching philosophy and rule that you live by.
Thank you. I believe Joe Herding had his hand up.
Yeah, will this be for going forward in presidential searches, or will this be retroactive? Will it be an audit performed on all of our college presidents to see if they match this policy?
It would be a proactive and not a retroactive policy, so that any president hired after the implementation effective date of the policy would have to have those particular qualifications.
Then I also see James Lee's hand up.
Yes, ma'am. Pam, in reference to those compensations, that range, will we be given the range that is at the discretion of the president? And if that range goes above that, then does the president have to come back and ask the board for an exception to that?
Right, that's pretty much it. So what you would do is you would set what's called an executive level compensation plan, and it would have a range in which you believe that the president would should set that compensation, and potentially criteria for that. But it would also say, hey, you can do these, and these different supplemental pays might be available or whatever, and you set that as the board. And then if the president deviates, it's kind of like sentencing guidelines. So if the president deviates up or even deviates below it, then that would need to come before the board.
But then we will have, at the meeting, you will give us those rates is what they are. Is that correct?
Right. And I think what will happen is Wendell will work with Jackie and bring to us something to insert into that plan. And it will probably include such factors as market rate and qualifications, how you determine what president gets X amount and what president gets Y amount. So that would be like an executive level plan that you would, just like the salary schedule, that you would approve.
Are we talking about not only, now I want to make sure I'm correct, are we talking about not only the senior executive cabinet, but are we talking also about college presidents?
We're talking about all of the college presidents and the cabinet at the system office.
Right. Thank you, ma'am.
Mm-hmm.
I believe Brianna had her hand up.
Okay.
Yes, thank you, Chair Damaris. Pam, sorry, back to you. I have a question. As you were explaining, and we're going to go back again to the exceptions on the credentialing of college presidents. You made the statement that you said someone would vote on those exceptions. Who would that someone be? Is that the search committee? Is that the president? The local board? It would be the Regents.
That would be you. So remember that you are the Board of Regents. So if you look at this policy, you'll see that it begins with you. And it says Board of Regents is the sole governing body of KCTCS and its 16 colleges. So you, under the statute, have the authority to set credentials for employees, et cetera, and you have hiring authority to ratify employee decisions. So it has to come to you. It would not be the local board. They are an advisory board. You're setting the policy that is going to be the standard for the system.
Correct. I think maybe my wires are crossed on who's voting for what. So
okay.
So imagine we're in the middle of a search.
Mm-hmm.
And we have let's say the local search committee has found a candidate that they do like. Are they then going to bring that candidate with a justification to the board? Seems like that would delay a search. Am I incorrect in?
Well, they wouldn't even, so Jackie Cecil as the HR personnel who helps with the search, then with the search consultant, they would go through all the candidates. And if they did not meet those minimum requirements, then likely they would not move forward. So we're probably going to do that. Now, what would happen is if for some reason there was someone that they identified as appropriate to move forward regardless, then they might let that person go forward to the search committee. But before it could go on to finalist, it would have to come to the Board of Regents for an approval. But now that's your procedure to determine. So you could even determine it beforehand that Jackie would need to consult with, and I keep saying Jackie, but system office VP for HR would have to go up and talk to Dr. Zarapata and say, hey, we've got these candidates, 4 of them meet the criteria, but 1 of them doesn't. And so we believe, though, that because of all of this this person won the Nobel Prize. We think even though they don't have a PhD or an EDD, sorry, thinking about myself, that they should move forward because of all of this stuff that they've done. And then the president would bring it to you all and say, this is why, this is the justification, and do you agree? And if you agreed, then it would go back. But I don't think it benefits it to be cut off anywhere after the finalists have been decided. It needs to be before that. And we'll talk about the procedure as we go forward.
Thank you, Pam. I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Fletcher?
Yeah, I was going to apologize first. My phone died, so I went to my computer. Now my computer has died, so I'm back to my phone. So I may have to ping pong back and forth a few more times. Long day. Anyway, 2 more things. So previously, and you may have already answered this, but I want to make sure I'm clear. Previously, you talked about we would be setting compensation and benefits, but it almost sounded like there was an exception for.
I believe Regent Fletcher had her hand up.
I think Lisa's kind of frozen again.
Yeah.
Yeah, a little bit.
I'm back.
Okay.
Okay. So my question.
Grass Parkway here.
You kind of made it sound like that we set it for everyone, but there was an exception maybe for the cabinet or the executive level. But then it sounded like you came back and said no, that we would also set that policy and procedure.
Right. So let me let me kind of back up. So the reason this is coming before us is because of your non-delegable duty to approve benefits and compensation. So if you have if you set the salary schedule, you don't go as the Board of Regents and say, I want candidate X to get $50,000 and candidate Y, when you hire, $40,000. As long as it is within that salary schedule that you all voted on, then the discretion is there and the approval is already there because you approved that particular salary schedule. That is the case for faculty and staff, and it goes up to band 16. Anyone who is above a band 16 does not have a band, so they're considered non-banded employees. So you have never, as the Board of Regents, considered compensation for those people. It has been within the sole discretion of the KCTCS president. In order to not hamstring the president who might need to hire someone, what we're recommending is that you have a policy that sets a band for non-banded people. So it's a minimum to a maximum for non-banded people, which would be the cabinet and all of the presidents. So you would set that and you would say, this is why we feel a president should be in this range, why a cabinet member should be in this range. And if you deviate from that range, down or up, then it will need to come before the board for further approval.
So you know how I feel about historical procedures. While I want to completely honor the work done before us, I always want to see if it meets the muster of our current state, as well as prepares us to move into the future. So while I know we have historically never done those things, is it within our purview to do so? And from what you're saying, it sounds like it totally is within our purview to do so. So has it always been our statutory obligation to do so and we just haven't? Or what am I missing there?
Right. So, I don't know. I mean, I believe that in my reading of the statute, you have always had the statutory authority and duty to set compensation. But somehow, historically, along the way, with the delegation of authority, it was interpreted that this, in order to do administrative things such as hire people, that we would need to have this non-banded area. But and this is my interpretation, and I have bounced it off a couple of people to make sure that I am not overthinking this, but essentially what you have is just a bunch of people that have been solely in the discretion of the KCTCS president and not being seen by the board at all. So I don't think it's appropriate to say you've got to set compensation for the M&O worker over here, but you don't get to have any say for compensation of a president or a cabinet member.
You're on mute, Wendy.
That segues to the second question, which is a follow-up to the just had. So if we write this procedure about the presidential requirements and we write that very well, we should never really have to, it's going to be pretty rare that someone gets brought to us who can at least meet our minimum standards, correct?
Correct.
I just want to make sure that, there's this feeling out there, I will say, that there's preferential treatment given to particular individuals at times. I want to remove that perception. We are not about that whatsoever. And I want to make sure that as a board that we are able to set that minimum standard in such a way that no one ever questions that we are going for the very best, because our students deserve the very best credentials. Right. And I also want to make sure that within that procedure, which maybe is somewhere else as well, that those credentials are verified before anyone is allowed to submit a video or submit, be asked for an interview or become a semi or a finalist in a search.
Right.
I just want to, I definitely, Lisa, I'm sorry, Chair Damaris, I want to be in on that. I guess the whole board will, but I want to make sure that I'm on that policy. You're right. All about that. So
Right.
thank you for clarification.
Thank you, Wendy, and that's exactly the intent of this. It's a gray area. It was kind of a, as they say, fall through the cracks area. We need to fix that. We need to be very purposeful in how we set the policy and the procedure, and I think we're on the right track. So I'm real excited about that. I believe I see Paul's hand up. Paul, do you have something you want to add to this discussion, or do you just have your hand up?
Yeah, I just real briefly, it would seem to me that if we are going to make any exception to a search process, it would need to happen before it even started, unless I'm not following this right. Because I would hate to set some sort of parameters on the search, and then, some person applies that doesn't meet. I don't know. It just seems like it'd be a lot cleaner if that happened before anything even started. Am I off
Right.
base
And
there?
that's the point I was trying to make, Paul. You're exactly saying what I'm thinking. Why would we put a finalist before we let it come before the board? This needs to be clean going from the very beginning forward. Don't let it get to that and then have to turn somebody away. I totally agree with that and respect that opinion.
And that's what will be in the procedure, the deviation procedure. So it basically, the policy, when you look at it, it will say that your procedure must contain a mechanism for deviation. And I honestly don't see why we would ever deviate unless there were just some sort of great apocalypse, to be perfectly honest. But if in order to maintain your ability to be flexible for whatever reason out there, you need to have some way to be able to say, hey, we want to deviate in this particular search. And it may be like you might have a search that failed, and so you might have to come back and say, hey, we're going to deviate a little bit from this search because we were unable with that criteria to find who we needed, but we're still not going to change this qualification or this qualification, just this one qualification.
Got it. That makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, that is really excellent conversation. I imagine we'll get more questions from the full board as we discuss this item. But again, many thanks to Pam and Terry and all of their work, along with Jackie and Wendell, to dig real deep into some of the things that we're doing and ensure that as Regents we are meeting our statutory requirements. I really appreciate it.
And then one more, and before we move on, you had mentioned that Terry had uploaded a couple of things to the team site. When I log on to my team site, the last thing I see posted on there is like from May. So I don't know if I need to sync something or if there's something off there, but I'm not seeing anything new.
Okay, and in my electronic SharePoint, I can reply and upload things, but can't necessarily explain that. I'm going to call on Terry to do so.
Pam, I believe that's a cookies and cache issue.
Okay.
Since Chris Howes is our new CIO, someone might want to bounce that off of him and get some information back to Wendy.
Okay, great. That would be perfect.
So
Thank
just,
you.
this is Terry, just to jump on there. I've uploaded the files, but I haven't sent you all a message about it yet. So it's in the file folder. It's not in the chat. So I'll send a message. I just wanted you all to know that it was there, and then you'll get a message about it.
Great, thank you. So kind of going back to our yellow highlighted items, I think we actually talked about something that wasn't yellow highlighted, but that's okay. And I'm trying to read this really tiny text on my phone, and I'm thank you, Hannah. Does item O talk about review of procedures for the evaluation of the president? Is that what that says?
That is correct.
Okay.
And
And that's a different topic. So can you cover that?
absolutely. So, as we have picked up our policies at the request of the board and started reviewing those more frequently, the review of the procedures for the evaluation of the system president requires that we look at those procedures every 3 years. They were last looked at in 2019, so it is time to take a look at those again. So we will have that as an information item at December meeting. You can look at them and say, these are great. They don't need any changes. And we will keep those as they are and move forward. If you look at them and say, hey, we want to add this or take something out about the review of how the board evaluates Dr. Zarapata, then we can change that, put those procedures in place, and have those finalized for March, which then the evaluation of Dr. Zarapata occurs in June, so they will be in place by the evaluation timeline.
Perfect. Thank you, Hannah. And guess what? This is the committee's action in motion. We are actually looking at a policy that had a sunset or review period 3 years later, and we're at the 3-year mark and we're doing our job. So Pam, you need to congratulate us.
Yes.
Okay, if there are no questions on that, I think Hannah also has some information about procedures for the faculty and staff elections.
Yes, not to burst the bubble of the good work being done by the committee, but the review of the procedures for faculty and staff elections have not been reviewed in probably 20 years. They were pulled from UK when we were started. There is some language in there that's very tricky. It's just not easy to implement. I think the newly elected faculty and staff regents would probably agree. It goes to both who can run as a candidate for the board and who can vote during the faculty and staff election process. And so I work with the 16 colleges to carry the elections out. I've got a lot of feedback about what needs to be changed moving forward. And so I'll present an information item in December, just that we are going to start reviewing these and making changes to bring to the board for approval. Since we did just do an election, it will be 3 years until the next election, but we want to go ahead and get these done now with some feedback and have them in place by the time we have to do this again.
Great. Thank you, Hannah. And, you know, as we mentioned before, one of the big purposes of this committee is to do this good work. I don't know if, Pam, you have an update on the overarching work being done on policies relative to the policies being updated according to the statutes. I think you're bringing on a new staff member who might work on that. And would you give this committee just a brief update on that activity?
Right. So actually, we have 2 new staff members, 2 staff attorneys who will be taking up much of the slack on several other items that are pressing, so that we who know the system a little more will be able to really jump in and do the policies and the procedures. So I am hoping that we will make substantial progress in the January and February timeframe, so that by March we may have multiple policies to be able to approve. And we are working, as we talked about when we first started this process, even though we've been thrown off our timeline, we still are trying to review all of those that appear to be out of statutory compliance first, and then move forward from there.
Great, thank you, Pam. And that's an important distinction. We had set out at the beginning of this adventure a priority of making sure that we address all the statutory compliance issues, because that was of the highest priority. But as you can see, as we go along and are working through some of our day-to-day things that we do on a regular basis, we're also bringing policies together to the board to be reviewed as needed, such as the ones Hannah just covered, such as the new policy Pam just covered, and also policies that I know Chancellor Williams has brought to the board to help us stay current. So I really appreciate all the work that staff is doing in this area. It's a yeoman's task, but there's a lot of people that are involved and they're doing great work. And I just want to say thank you to you, Paul, and to all of your staff who are doing this work.
Appreciate it. They're doing a great job.
They are. Last three items on the agenda are update items, an update on the strategic planning process. Chancellor Williams did promise further updates after our retreat on how things are going with strategic planning. So I imagine she'll give us a lot of that information. Paul and I wrap up our college tours. I think we do one the week of the board meeting earlier that week, and then we're done. So there's a lot of data still being collated from each of those different visits and being fed into the strategic plan, but hoping to hear more information from Chancellor Williams on that as well. Also, Chancellor Williams will be talking about learner success and workforce development. And then I am not sure exactly who on our staff does our legislative session. Hannah, remind me of who does that for the board?
Brian Perry.
I'm sorry, say that name again.
Brian Perry.
Brian. So will Brian be doing the legislative update to the,
Yes.
to the board? Okay. Okay, great. And then finally, administrative services will provide an update. One of the things that we're trying to work on, these are categories for those of you new to the board that have typically been presented at each of our meetings. These are areas of the cabinet who provide regular updates to the board. You know, what we're trying to do with those is to make sure that those folks have the opportunity to provide an update, but certainly, you know, it needs to be something that's substantive and important to the board, so that, you know, it's okay if the answer is no update. So I just want folks to know that, you know, if not a whole lot has changed between meetings in a particular area, I don't want people to feel compelled to fill the void with something. So hopefully I said that right. Hannah, that's something you and I talked about.
Absolutely. And you'll see we had actually had based on what we've done in the past, we did have an update coming from Technology Solutions. We took that off. As Dr. Zarapata mentioned earlier, our new CIO just started this week. So while he will be at the board meeting and will be introduced, he will not have a report this month, but he will be there and available to answer questions should the board have them.
Perfect. Are there any additional questions from this committee? I'm doing a time check and we're at, I think, about 10 minutes of 6 p.m. Eastern, if I'm correct.
Madam Chairman, I have a question for the future. And if it's appropriate, I'd like to ask a question, or if you'd like to, what we talked about the other day about the staffing. So we'd have some information maybe in March when we talked about salaries for next year.
Yeah, I think you were asking, are you asking about the detailed composition of
Yeah, yes, ma'am. That so Wendell could be aware that how many people are in those bands and what their seniority is, like from 1 to 5 and 5 to 10 and 11 to so is. So as we look at salaries in the future, we have some idea of if we're going to give a percentage raise or try to do the compensation down the road. And I think that would be something that maybe in March or so, that at least some information that we have so we can make a decision before the June meeting, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, James Lee. And so that's critically important. We'll be getting a lot of information in December, but as we really start to understand, and this is for the banded folks, the composition of those bands, we got a great set of high-level data via scatter plot that showed us kind of where everybody sat in those bands, but that just gave us a salary picture and where they sit in the band. We really don't know the longevity factors. You know, if there's 100 people in the band, how many of them have been with us less than 5 years, 5 to 10, 10 to 15, things like that.
And I know that Wendell will be bringing that information forward, specifically the years of service in the different bands, and he'll present that in December.
Oh, actually, great. Thank you. So we'll get it even sooner than we thought. Wonderful. Are there any other questions for the committee? All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Thanks for your patience as Paul and I do this meeting on the road. Appreciate everyone's participation and the excellent conversation.
I hope you're not in the car with Paul, are you?
Oh, no.
No,
No.
no.
Well, no. I mean, that's too much, is because he's already probably 100 miles ahead of you right now. Is what I'm saying is.
I'm sure he blasted past us a long time ago.
No, I'm already riding on one ticket from Hopkins County. So.
All right. All right,
And-
everybody be careful, and thank you so much for your service and your time. I appreciate it. And with that, I'll say happy Thanksgiving in advance to all of you. Hopefully
And we
you'll
need
all-
an official motion to adjourn.
I make a motion.
Call
Sure.
for the motion, James Lee. Did I get the motion?
Yes, you did, young lady.
All right, and by
Bye,
consent.
y'all.
Second.
Bye,
Bye.
Kctc.
Bye-bye. Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving, y'all. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank
Happy
you.
Thanksgiving.
Bye.